Hi there. I'm Katie Deering, and I'm the Secondary Literacy Content Coach at ESC Region 11. And today we're going to be talking about how to revise a piece of writing using a mentor text. So just to make sure that we're clear and we're using common language, a mentor text is a text that we can read but also use for several purposes. It's something that will lend itself to a lot of revision as a writer. So it's a way to really dig in to think about why authors make choices, why writers make choices, and then to be able to model some of our own choices as writers after a piece of writing. So we're going to dig in and look at an example of that right now. So this is going to be my mentor text. This is an excerpt from a poem called March the 9th, 2020 by Mariangela Gualtieri, who is from Italy. And the information on how you can read that poem in its full form is on there linked. And so we're just going to be looking at the first three stanzas to give you an example about what a mentor text can do for your writing. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do when using a mentor text is we just want to read the text and familiarize ourselves with the text. We're not going to mark anything up right now. We're not going to do any kind of annotations. We're just going to read it and we're going to understand it. So I'm going to read it out loud. Just again, these are three stanzas of a larger poem. I'm telling you this, we needed to stop. We knew. We all felt it, that it was too furious, our frenzy. Being inside of things, outside of ourselves. Squeeze every hour. Make it yield. We needed to stop and we couldn't. We needed to do it together. Slow down the race, but we couldn't. There was no human force that could hold us back. And since this was for all of us a tacit wish, like an unconscious will, perhaps our species has obeyed, loosened the bonds that protect our seed, opened the innermost cracks, and let it in. So right now, reading this is April 6th, 2020, so we're still in the midst of our social distancing and our shelter in place right now in the DFW area. And so when I read this immediately, I start thinking about all of the time that I'm spending with my family right now, all of the busyness of my schedule where we would say things to ourselves like, man, I wish I had time to insert whatever here, right? And so I kind of see this poem as this correlation of saying that it's quite possible that there's some blessings to be found in this. This is maybe nature's way of making us slow down. So, and I'll tell you, the first three stanzas really make me excited to read the rest of the text. So when we're looking at using a text as a mentor for our writing, then we really have to switch gears and start to read this, not just to enjoy it. I wanted us to do that now, but to think about it from a new perspective, to think about it as a writer. So we're going to really look at the poem as though we are authors, to look and see how the poet crafted language to accomplish a purpose. And so I know that seems a little intimidating, so we're going to use some questions to help us out. So there's two areas that we can really focus on with a mentor text. The first of those is craft moves. So craft moves, again, the way that authors use language on purpose, whether that's sentence structure, whether that's word choice. And so we can use some of these questions to guide us, thinking about what's working. What do we notice about the text that we think is effective? What are the things that stand out to us? When we think about the good writing, when you read something and even if you don't know what it's called, you're like, man, that's good. Or something that has an effect on the overall tone or theme of a text. And then we want to challenge ourselves when we think we found a couple of things to just ask, what else? What else do I notice? What else do I see? Then I can think from the perspective of word choice. Why did the author choose this particular word? Or if it was changed to something else, how would it affect the piece? What effect does that have on me as a reader? And then what is the effect of the sensory language that the poet uses? Another area that you can focus on with a mentor text is looking at punctuation. So saying, what is the punctuation doing? It's not just something that we throw around, right? People choose specific punctuations for a purpose. So what is that doing? What effect does the punctuation have on my reading aloud? That's one of the reasons that I read those three stanzas aloud to you, so that you could really hear where certain pauses are, where certain pauses do not exist. And so you can really hear the effect of punctuation there. Start playing with the idea of removing it. How does that change the meaning? Or what if I switched to different punctuation? What would that do? And then thinking about what is the writer accomplishing with his or her choices? And again, extending that question, what else? So here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to use every single question as a checklist. These are just some things that I can use to really get me thinking. So I'm not going to go exactly off of this list because I have used mentor text several times, but I'm going to model for you what it might look like for me to think, I really want to take my own writing. So in this case, using a poem, I would be writing my own poem, and I want to use this existing poem that I feel like has a lot of great qualities, a lot of things that I would want to do as a writer. And I'm going to take what I glean from this mentor text and I'm going to use it to revise my own writing. So at this juncture, I would have my own writing done, or at least a rough draft of something together. And so I'm looking at this poem to find ways to make my writing better. So I'm going to think out loud for you, and I'm just going to make some marks and annotations as we go through this process. So I notice when it says, I'm telling you this, we needed to stop, that there's no punctuation to separate here. So we see that this is a run-on. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is that idea of stopping. The period at the end of that phrasing makes the reader stop, but the run-on really shows that there's a lack of stopping, right? That everything's kind of running together. So I can tell that the author is using sentence structure and even using something that we might consider to be a grammatical error to model that idea of everything going super fast and just never stopping. So that sentence running together. We knew, we all felt it. So I really like that this use of short sentence structure, and I'm going to abbreviate that as an SS. And I think that it's very abrupt, right? We knew. When I think about what effect that might have on a reader is, you almost think about that moment where you're watching a movie and you know that something crazy is about to happen. It's not like people are reading these long monologues. It's almost like, oh, it was you. I knew it. So I like that short sentence that makes the point. We all felt it, that it was too furious, our frenzy, being inside of things and outside of ourselves. Ooh, I really like this sentence here. So one of the things that I'm noticing the poet doing is using opposite words. So the word inside and outside, and making that a parallel structure that can illustrate almost a mirror effect. So when I think about what it means to be inside of things but outside of ourselves, I kind of think about my schedule, that I'm so involved in so many things, but I'm almost watching myself, right? Like an out-of-body experience where I'm not actually getting to enjoy the things that I'm involved with. So by using parallel structure, a writer can paint that picture of two different realities, which I'm going to write down because I don't want to forget that. I think that might be a cool strategy to use. So then I think about some word choices here. Squeeze every hour and make it yield. So that word squeeze is a really good, powerful verb. I'm going to put a VV there for vivid verb. But I also am going to make a little arrow here. When you think about squeezing every hour, what image comes to mind? For me, it's almost like making lemonade, right? Like you squeeze the juice out of the lemon and you squeeze it until all of it's gone. And then there's really nothing left but this hollow shell. So paired with that other verb of make, normally it's kind of a no-no word. It's more of a basic verb, but making it yield, I think about beating it into submission. So I think that's a really cool technique that the poet's doing, is using a metaphor to illustrate a feeling. And again, I'm going to make some abbreviations. The most important thing about annotating is it needs to make sense for you. It needs to make sense for your brain. So then I look, it says we needed to stop and we couldn't. Well, I've seen that phrase before. So we needed to stop, and then up here we needed to stop. So I can tell that the writer is also using repetition. And when you see a phrase repeated, over and over again, it really correlates to the main idea or theme or message of the poem. That idea of society needing someone to stop us because we're not stopping ourselves. We needed to do it together, slow down the race, but we couldn't. There was no human force that could hold us back. So again, we see the repetition of we couldn't. We see that idea of a fragment here to use as an illustration or an example. And so then I'm going to go down here to see if there's anything else I'm noticing. And since this was for all of us a tacit wish, like an unconscious will, I don't know if you guys have been looking at the punctuation, but this little dash here, I really like that technique to pause. When you're reading it orally, it's supposed to make you pause for dramatic effect, right? So that could be a technique that we highlight. Perhaps our species has obeyed, loosened the bonds that protect our seed, opened the innermost cracks, and let it in. So I'm noticing also this use of a fragment. So I mentioned that a minute ago. So a fragment being an incomplete sentence, beginning with a verb, to add detail and to add emphasis to the phrasing beforehand. And you almost see this parallel structure with the verbs where it says obeyed and then opened. So you could take that obeyed, loosen the bonds to protect our seed. You could take that out and then put it in with open the innermost cracks and let it in. You could sub them out. But instead the author's listing it as this complete sentence, this run-on, which kind of makes me think of that first sentence, right? That idea of the lack of stop. So let's step back for a second. So I've gone through and I've talked out some of my thinking. You can see I have a lot of different annotations here. And when you're looking at a mentor text, it's really good to not limit yourself. You just want to notice as many things as pop out to you, right? Because you want to have some choices as a writer. You want to be able to look at all of the different tools at your disposal and think, what can I realistically do? Or what is maybe one or two things that I noticed in this mentor text, the author doing, that I could then take and use in my own writing. It's pretty unrealistic to say that I want to do every single technique, because we also want to remember that this is someone's intellectual property, right? So we're not replicating the poem and just subbing in different words, but we do want to borrow ideas and skills that the writer's using to grow ourselves as a writer. So I want to challenge myself here to look at all of these noticings and to pick 1 to 2 things that I think really made an impact in the text that I think it might be fun to play with as a writer. And I'm going to highlight those to just then use in my own writing. So one of the things that I think is really cool in this poem, and I see it a lot, is this idea of a repeated phrase. So right here where it says we needed to stop, we needed to stop. And even just the verbing of we needed to. I like that phrasing because, you know, it really hits home the message of the poem. It makes it a little bit more obvious to the reader, and it creates this feeling of almost careening out of control. We needed to stop. We needed to stop. It's like you're repeating it because it's a compulsory thing. So I think in my own poem, I could go back and I can look and think about the big idea that I'm trying to establish. And maybe I could either add in a couple of lines or adjust some lines to show that in a couple of stanzas I have a repeated phrase that somehow goes with the message or theme of my poem. And I'm going to try to keep that language simple, right? Making sure that the repeated phrase isn't this huge long line. It's very, very simple and low vocabulary here. And so in my writing, I would want to set a goal to maybe use that technique once, just so that it's not overkill. But I think that that's a technique that I definitely could use. Let me pick one more thing that I want to challenge myself to do. So there's a couple of things that I'm noticing. One thing I think would be kind of difficult for me as a writer. So the part where it's using, the poet's using the fragments, that seems like a really cool piece, but I don't know that that would work well with my particular poem. One thing that I think would work well is the use of some figurative language. So this phrase here where we're using the word squeeze to model or mimic that process of squeezing a lemon, but it's really juicing time, squeezing time. I think I could challenge myself to go through my poem and see if there's any illustration that I might be able to use a different verb that could create a metaphor. So the only part that's actually metaphoric is that verb squeeze, but immediately we get that image of the lemon. So challenging myself to change a verb, and maybe I would have to adjust some punctuation or adjust some words as well, that can create a powerful image to illustrate my repeated point. So could I use more things? Absolutely. As I'm writing, can I go back to my mentor text and try some more techniques? It's actually really fun when you get going, you start to feel more comfortable with it. But as of right now, a good goal to have is to pick 1 or 2 techniques that you feel like would translate well into your revisions. So again, this is not something that I would necessarily do before I start writing. I want to make sure that I have a draft, a rough draft of some sort of the writing that I'm doing. And for this example, again, my writing would be a poem because I am using another poem as my mentor text. So if I was writing, say, an opinion piece, I might want to use another opinion piece as a mentor text. As I get better at that, then I can start to use different genres for different things, and I could use maybe a poem as a mentor text for something else. But as we're just first diving into this idea of using a mentor text to revise, it's kind of important to match those genres up. So, if you're watching this and you're looking at this poem as a mentor text, you would really want to go through the entire poem and emulate that process. Again, using these questions as a good starting point to help you dig in and to kind of talk out your thinking. It also really helps to talk some of these things out with a partner. So if you have someone at home with you or someone that you could call and kind of do this together, that might be a great idea, is to look at these questions as a team and then pick some different strategies each that you would want to do, some different craft moves that you might want to do in your own writing. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And I am so excited to hear about what you come up with in your own mentor texts. Have a good day.